Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Welcome everybody to a Muslim Geordie podcast special. This is going to be a one-off for until the next one, I guess, on the topic of the Newcastle United Saudi takeover. And this is an interesting topic because I've been getting a lot of discussions around this and a lot of comments about this as well since the takeover has taken place. Now, before we start the podcast, of course, I've got to give a shout out to our sponsors, Wingtown Newcastle. They're on Deliveroo tonight. If you make an order tonight while the podcast is going on, you'll get a 20% discount. So make your way over to the Wingtown Deliveroo link, and then it should be on there. Hassan, I think it's on there, right? The Deliveroo link. Just click on that in the comments, and then you'll be able to get your 20% off if you just mention us. All right, so I've got some really exciting guests on for tonight's program as well. Tonight's show, we're going to take a look at the joint takeover of Newcastle United Football Club and some of the issues that are surrounding it, from becoming the richest club in the world literally overnight. We're going to discuss some of the things around illegal streaming to human rights, sports washing. We're going to a no holds barred conversation tonight. So we're going to bring in comments from the guests, but also comments from those who are watching, you who are watching. We're going to encourage you, even if you want to come on the stream, we'll get the link on there as well for those who are interested. So some of the things that we want to discuss tonight is, and this is my genuine view, that I think there's a lot of jealousy over this move. And I think there are some genuine concerns too. Tonight, we're going to try and unpack some of those issues and concerns and discuss as much of them as possible, of course. It is going to be a live call-in type of show, so I'm sure there's going to be lots of comments and discussion. But I just want to mention something that Kevin Keegan said quite recently. He said about not giving up hope for the club. And obviously he had his particular views about Mike Ashley and the way that the club was run. And he made a very important comment. And I think this is important to set the scene of this discussion for today. He said, obviously, one, they've got money, as in the new owners have got money, but don't let that worry you because so have all the other teams. They've all done it. Manchester United, Chelsea, Man City. If you look at the top 4 or 5, and not just in this country, you can look at Spain, Barcelona, Real Madrid. And because they have the most money, the most sponsorship, and they're on the TV the most, it's the same in Italy and France and so on and so forth. And he made the point, he said Newcastle are now in that league. And so with that as sort of the backdrop of what Kevin Keegan mentioned, this is going to be the opening of this discussion. Now, I know some of the main issues that we're going to discuss are around, the illegal streaming of EPL matches, the Premier League rules and regulations, a state being allowed to take over a football club, human rights issues and sports washing. We're even going to touch upon the clothing worn by the fans and whether it's deemed racist or not. We're going to talk about all of that, hopefully, in tonight's program. And I'm going to put a disclaimer out there, first of all, just to make it clear that, look, I know there's some very sensitive topics that are going to be discussed in tonight's show. And I'm going to put a disclaimer out there. I am not a supporter or defender of any regime, home or abroad, who partake in human rights abuses that go against my values and ethics as a Muslim. I have to make that very, very clear. I'm not here to defend anybody, for that matter, whether it's here in the UK or abroad, in Saudi Arabia or any other country. So let me introduce my guests for tonight's program, and I want to start off by thanking my good mate, War Kid Stu Armstrong, for hooking up this contact to get Steve Wraith on the show. Actor, writer, producer, promoter. He runs his own podcast. He's a host of his own podcast, NUFC Matters. And he's going to discuss the takeover in particular to start off with, because he was directly involved in that. And then I'm going to move over to our next guest, Roshan Saleh, who is the editor of 5 Pillars, the Muslim news channel. And I was with Roshan on the first home game after the takeover, interviewing some of the fans. And it was some very interesting discussions, I have to say. And our third guest, he's going to be joining us shortly in a little while, Ayyaz Malik. who's a sports journalist and writer. And he writes about sports and football in particular. And he wrote quite an interesting piece about the takeover and what it means for football. So let's start off. Let's start this conversation. Steve, let me introduce you first. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this takeover and some of the things that you were involved in. Because in my last conversation with you, you mentioned that you were involved in in Rafa Benitez's team when originally the conversations first started. So tell us a little bit about that to start off with.
Yeah. Well, first of all, salam to all your viewers. Thank you very much for inviting us on this podcast. It does mean a lot to be able to come on and share the screen with you guys. And the Rafa Benitez story was very interesting. I'm just a fan. I'm a Newcastle United supporter, somebody who has put his head above the parapet on more than one occasion over the years, whether it's a fanzine editor, local television or national television interviews. And now, as you mentioned already, the NUFC Matters podcast. I'm somebody who likes to give my opinion on Newcastle United. And that really pricked the ears of Rafa Benitez's advisors when he came to the club. And they reached out and contacted me and asked me to become part of their circle, if you like, and help to get fans on board, help to introduce them to supporters. And this is where the Amanda Staveley link really came in for me, because one particular game, Liverpool at home, I was given the joyous job, I guess, of meeting Amanda Staveley and her husband Mairdad and giving them a lowdown on Newcastle United Football Club and explaining what a wonderful football club we had, what a wonderful city we had, what wonderful supporters we had. It was, it's a place where if there was a little bit of tender love and care and a bit of investment, that the sleeping giant could be awakened and we could finally see, major developments, not only on the football pitch, but in the community, a multicultural community. And from my perspective, that's all I did. I sat with her for a couple of hours. I waxed lyrical about the football club, about the supporters, about the area. And clearly it had an impression, because she then went off to knock on the chairman and director's lounge and speak to Lee Charnley. And she said, I want to buy your football club. And that was basically it. And from that moment onwards, the battle, and it was a battle, began.
Oh, brilliant. And you know what? It's interesting because you must have left some impression on her, simply because at one point it looked like it was dead in the water. It looked like the whole thing collapsed at one point. What was the situation there?
It on more than one occasion it looked as if it had collapsed, and that was the concerning thing, I guess, for me, because we were always in the know. And when I say we, there was a collective we. There was a small group of people who I have close to me who knew what the situation was and knew what the progress or the lack of progress was. And it was tough. It was like keeping a very big secret. A lot of the time on social media, people would be asking me, is it going through? Is it still on? Are the Saudis still interested? I knew, a small amount of what was going on, it has to be said. However, I knew enough to know that the Saudis were still interested, the PCP and the Rubens were still interested, and that they were still, fighting for this club. And that was why I could always give an answer, which was, I'm 100% confident that they are still there and they are still trying to buy it. But as time went on, and it did go on, it was starting to drag. We were looking at the situation and we were thinking, this is just never going to happen. It's, clearly that there's an issue with piracy. There's the Premier League don't want this to happen. It became more obvious that there was almost an alleged cartel operating in the Premier League, and we were battling the top six. And it just became a situation where, it seemed as if the evidence, if you like, and the people standing against this takeover were just growing in strength and growing in numbers. And it just didn't look as if it was going to happen. And I remember going down to a pre-season friendly at Rotherham earlier this year. And the announcement that, Mike Ashley was going to take it legal. He was going to take it to court. And that was when I realized that, potentially this might just go ahead. But There was then talk of the court cases not being operational and possibly till next year. And, ultimately we would be in a position where we wouldn't have one legal case, but two legal cases. Obviously the CAT case, which Keith Patterson brought against the Premier League. And I felt we could be in a situation here where this all just goes against us. And I've got to be honest, that was when I had a wobble. I felt it might not go through now. But luckily it did. I think we got all of our legal ducks in a row. And I think the Premier League decided to back down before it got to court, before it got to in front of the judges. And I think that ultimately they had no choice but to push the takeover through.
I mean, look, as a childhood fan, as somebody who's seen the situation in Newcastle United, gone through the whole entertainers phase and in the 90s, and seen the takeover from Freddie Shepherd and then from Mike Ashley. 14 years we've seen the ups and downs, the highs and lows of the football club. And you know what? When the discussions were taking place about Newcastle United being taken over by the Saudis, and Amanda Staveley, she's had discussions and so on and so forth. And like you mentioned, the longer it went on, I really didn't think it was going to happen, because the proof is in the pudding, right? It's like that we've heard this, that there's a takeover happening. Mike Ashley signed the club, it falls through, nothing happens. This has happened a few times over his sort of time in charge of Newcastle United. So I honestly thought at one point it's just another situation where it's maybe just a bit of talk, a bit of hot air, and it's gonna fall through. It's not really serious. You must have felt that a few times as well, and I think you must have heard that from the fans a lot. We were very, very skeptical about this takeover. That it's just another Mike Ashley stunt, right? To not buy big in the transfer market, puts it up for sale. There's a so-called buyer, and then it falls through, and then we're back to the same situation again.
Yeah, I just think it's it was the fact that it took place during lockdown. The country was in a pandemic, something which none of us have ever had to go through before. Many of us either not working or working from home, having to find other ways to fill our time because everywhere that we would normally go to was closed, and it was a strange time. And I think that a lot of people suffered with this takeover. Their mental health suffered, and the takeover to be going through at this point, it wasn't healthy. Social media, which can be a toxic place at times, became even more toxic. I'm sure we could come on to that later on, but I was the victim, I felt, of a lot of trolling from accounts which were clearly paid for by potentially other companies, and geopolitical politics came into it as well. We suddenly all had to have a diploma in geopolitics. I mean, essentially all Newcastle United fans wanted was Mike Ashley out of the club and a new owner to come in who had a few quid, who could spend it on some new players, maybe decorate the ground and give us a new training facility, because our training facilities are out of date. It's as simple as that. That's all we really wanted. But then we found ourselves being attacked by, various Twitter accounts who clearly didn't want the Saudi takeover, and it became very poisonous. And I think, from my perspective, I didn't think it had taken its toll on me at all. I've got tough skin. I've worked in the Newcastle city centre bars and nightclubs. I did that for 18 years as a doorman. I was used to taking abuse face to face, so surely a bit of online trolling isn't going to affect you. But I've got to be honest, when this takeover did eventually go through, I actually, I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't joyous. I wasn't dancing in the streets. I was actually tired. I think I actually had a mental breakdown for a couple of reasons, because one of Rafa's team, who had been involved in the very start of this, had died in February with COVID, and I hadn't had the chance to mourn, I don't think, and I didn't get a chance to go to the funeral because of the restrictions on funerals. And then on top of that, I just think it was just all the pressure. And even though it wasn't me buying the football club and I wasn't, spending my hard-earned cash, trying to get this through, I felt as if I'd been through a battle, a war for the last couple of years, and a lot of that locked down in my own house. So, I'm delighted it's gone through, and it, give or take 24 hours, I was back to normal. But I think a lot of it was just down to the fact that it was made. It was made into this geopolitical argument, and Newcastle fans, and me in particular as well, we don't really understand it.
Yeah, I mean, before I bring Roshan into this, because he was with us, I was with him rather, and on the first home game. There's a question here by that Muslim guy: will the takeover benefit Newcastle City, not just the club? What are your thoughts on that, Steve? Was that part of the negotiation? Was that part of the discussion as well? How it will help the city, the communities, and things like that?
Very much so. And what you have to remember that this is PIF are obviously the majority shareholder, and PIF are the Public Investment Fund based in Saudi Arabia. However, they do have two consortium partners. One being the Reuben brothers. Jamie Reuben is the man who's put the money forward for that. A Jewish family. And you've also got Amanda Staveley and Mirdad. And Amanda Staveley is from Yorkshire. And essentially you have a northern lass. I mean, I'm not saying that could solve world peace, but if in other ways or in other businesses or politics, you could get the Saudis, some Jewish people and some people from England all sitting down together and doing business, it would be, be celebrated as a major achievement. I think with it being a football club, I think it gives us this whole new dimension. It gives us the Reubens, who are already investing millions of pounds into the area. They own the Gosforth Park Racecourse. They bought the old Odeon site just down from Northumberland Street. And Amanda Staveley and Mirdad are very successful in their own right as well. You have a perfect combination. And I think, yes, these people will invest in Newcastle. I think the Saudis will invest in the Northeast per se. We've just seen a big announcement, although it's not connected with this takeover. We've just seen a big announcement of Saudi investment in Middlesbrough, where hundreds of jobs are going to be made available. But yeah, I think there will be a lot of investment in the area. I think the football club will benefit greatly. And I also feel, and I know this is a fact, that when the football club does well, the city does well. And you just saw that on that game against Tottenham Hotspur. 10-2, I got up to the food bank where I was doing some volunteering to raise some money for the food bank on match day. And it was 2.5 hours before kickoff, and the place was vibrant. There were thousands of people outside the ground. The atmosphere had changed. The Mike Ashley hangover had gone, and everybody was just, full of hope, full of joy. And the bars were full, the restaurants were full before and after the game, which boosts the economy. It brings people into the city centre, and it's that whole match day experience. And families will come to families will come into the city centre because dad or mum might be going to the match, and the person who isn't interested in football goes shopping in the city centre. It's all those little off spins that come with a successful football team. And from my perspective, I'm very happy that this has happened. And whether it's the Saudis, whether it was somebody else, anybody would have done really other than Mike Ashley. It got to that stage for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt like this next comment brings me in nicely to bring Roshan into this conversation. Yeah, so Barry says, as a fan of 40 plus years, the takeover and hope brought by the new buyers is amazing. Steve and others have performed amazingly on club's behalf to keep fans going and informed. Can't wait for a linked Saudi future. Now, Roshan, let me bring you into this conversation because last Sunday, when the first home game after the takeover, you came up, you reached out and said, look, you want to come and do some interviews with the fans. You want to see what the mood is on the ground. Share that experience, because that video, we'll play the video at the end, by the way, at the end of the podcast. That was a very good, it captured it quite nicely what was going on. So let's bring you on, Roshan. Tell us about your experiences. And this is your first time in Newcastle as well, I guess, right?
Yeah, I've never been to Newcastle before. I've been to Durham, which ain't too far away, but never to Newcastle. So yeah, I was kind of looking for an excuse to come to your area, and yeah, I really liked it. I mean, I've been living in London for over 20 years now, although I'm not originally from the south. But yeah, I've become a bit of a soft southerner, I think, in all this time. And it's always nice to go up north. The people are friendlier, and generally it's kind of nice to get out of London because it really is rat race down here. And it's just a pleasure to go where, people will say, we'll give you the time of day, quite frankly. So, I mean, I had two ideas in my mind, I would say, before I came up and before I contacted you. One is that I wanted to find out what Newcastle fans thought about the takeover, whether they were bothered about the Saudi controversy, human rights, etc. And the other thing I wanted to find out about is Islam, because obviously I run a British Muslim website. And I was wondering whether the takeover of Newcastle United would spark an interest in the religion of Islam and Muslims in the city. So I guess those are the two types of questions I was asking the fans outside St James's Park, including yourself. And you said that it actually had sparked an increase of like visitors to your dawah stall, and you were getting more questions, and that could lead to more converts, etc. When I was asking the fans about Islam and Muslims, to be honest, they didn't have a clue. I'll be honest, they literally didn't have a clue. And I mean, they were coming out with certain stereotypes, which some might find a little bit offensive, but I personally didn't, because it wasn't coming from a bad place. It was coming from, I think, media stereotypes, basically. And people were just repeating those, but not in a malicious way. So I wasn't offended at all, but it was pretty obvious that the people of Newcastle didn't know much about Saudi Arabia as a country, the culture, the religion. And when it came to the takeover, I mean, they were just euphoric, weren't they? They was absolutely euphoric that their club is now the richest club in the world and will probably have a shot at the Premier League in 5 years and the Champions League soon after, after years and years in the doldrums. And they really weren't that bothered about human rights or any of that geopolitics. I mean, a few gave the impression that deep down they weren't comfortable about it, but ultimately, Newcastle United is the center of their lives, and that trumps everything else. So that was the sentiment I got. It didn't really change my mind, if I'm honest. Before I went up there, I thought, because obviously I've been to Saudi Arabia, I know the culture, and obviously this is the heartland of Islam, so all Muslims know a lot about Saudi Arabia. And it ain't the most popular nation state in the Muslim world at the moment, for a variety of reasons. We could go into that, but really briefly. I mean, obviously, they've conducted a very brutal war in Yemen these last few years. Hundreds of thousands have died. Millions are on the verge of starvation. We have a new de facto ruler there, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who effectively now is the ruler of Newcastle United as well. He's basically directly implicated in the killing of a journalist in Turkey, Jamal Khashoggi. We have the links with Israel that a lot of Muslims are very uncomfortable about. Saudi Arabia is seen as the main driver of the normalization process with Israel, to the kind of detriment of the Palestinian cause. So there's many reasons why Saudi Arabia isn't too popular, not only in the West, where it's always had a bit of a bad rap, mainly for human rights stuff and, they would say medieval barbarity and all that kind of stuff, but also in the Muslim world. Saudi Arabia is not the most popular state. So, they see they see Saudi Arabia and nations like the UAE and all those oil-rich energy, petro states. They see them as basically wasting the money of the ummah, of the Muslim masses. They've been gifted with all this money, oil wealth, energy wealth, and they're literally spending it not on health, not on education, not on poverty eradication, but on the tallest buildings in the world, on playthings like football clubs around the world. And it's just, and obviously they're doing this in order to whitewash their own reputations, and especially their really heinous human rights, the bad stuff they're doing in the human rights field.
I mean, there's a lot of things you mentioned. You just went straight for it, Roshan. Yeah, you went all out. But I was trying to build up to something there. But okay, that's fine. We can unpack some of those things. And I think there's a number of issues with what you've just mentioned there. So let's break down some of them. And I'm going to bring Ayyaz into the conversation as well, because Ayyaz wrote a piece on the takeover, and I found it quite interesting. And he did touch upon the human rights issues and why it was important or not important. I'm going to let Ayyaz speak first, and then I'll unpack some of the things that you mentioned, Roshan, if that's okay, yeah? Because I think there's a lot of inconsistencies with what you've said, and I think there's a lot of inaccuracies in what you've said as well. But before that, let me bring Ayyaz into this conversation. Ayyaz, over to you, bro. You with your article. Wa salam. I really appreciate the article, by the way. I really found it an interesting read. Share it with the
Yeah, inshallah, I will do. Well, firstly, to start off, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu to your lovely listeners, your viewers. I pray you're all well and in good health, Iman. Good evening, Steve. I hope you're well there.
Good evening, mate.
Hi. So, what Abu Tayyib was mentioning is that I shared an article with him, and for me, it's a bit painful to bring up, especially after today. I'm a Manchester United fan. Very brave to say that after today, but there you go.
I'm a Liverpool fan.
Oh well.
Don't worry, I'll be the referee for tonight. Don't worry.
So yeah, I shared with Abu Tayyib a article which was airing my opinions and views in regards to the takeover. Now, I really disagree to a passion how everybody just seems to remember the human rights when it comes to the Newcastle owners. Because the WWE, for example, they have the Crown Jewel event, which is in Saudi Arabia. There was talk of the Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury fight in Saudi Arabia. I don't like this notion of pick and choose when human rights becomes an issue, because we can mention Qatar, we can mention Abu Dhabi. They're both state-owned. They have some grey areas with their takeover, which is something I absolutely alluded to in my piece. So if we want to patrol about human rights, then we should go across the board. But the harsh reality is now, football is a money game. And I know you mentioned it in the banner, brother, about fans being salty. I read some information that Manchester United were one of the clubs who were strongly opposing the takeover. Now, I say because Newcastle are the only club in their city. I know there's Sunderland. Don't upset any Sunderland fans, but it's not in Newcastle per se. So, I mean, fair play to them. I mean, they've got a very passionate fan base. And I think they deserve something like this because all the other giants, sleeping giants with the greatest respect, Aston Villas, your Evertons, they all have billionaire takeovers. So now is surely Newcastle's time. And this issue with human rights, this is something which Boris should get involved with, but he hasn't. So they have been above board in the Premier League. Yeah, they may have the proverbial blood on their hands, but for footballing terms, it's what the Premier League needs, and Newcastle haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the point here is, look, the way that this has been done has been completely legit business, right? It's if anyone should have the finger pointed at them, it should be the Premier League. And we know that the Premier League has been set up as a big money business. That's what it is. Let's be honest about it, right? And it's there to make it participants wealthy, all right? Where there's big money, you're going to get corruption. You're going to get, maybe even dirty dealings and so on and so forth, right? So the point is bringing some of these issues up now, and I mentioned this in the video. I think it is very much selective outrage. I really do. If we talk about Newcastle United Football Club being taken over by a state or a billionaire or somebody who may have human rights issues that everybody wants to talk about, then we have to talk about the other billionaire owners, like you rightly mentioned, Ayyaz. We have to talk about the other corruption, and you have to extend it not only to football but other sports as well. I mean, when the Saudis were looking to take over from the Glazers in 2018 for Manchester United, there wasn't such a big hoo-ha made about that then.
That's very true.
Put it all out there, right? Let's talk about the double standards here and the way that this has been covered and talked about. When we talk about, you can talk about Saudi Telecom as a revenue stream in the past for Manchester United, and you're a Man U fan, Ayyaz. You know these stories, yeah. The same issues could be said about Manchester City. Sheikh Mansour is a member of he is the state, if you like, in the United Arab Emirates. He and his family run the country, and they make all the important decisions. And you could even say the same thing about them being an oil-rich country, subject to serious human rights concerns, and so on and so forth. And they've literally taken over Manchester City, and bought the league and all the stuff that everybody talks about, right? You can say the same about PSG and the Qatari royal family, who own, you know, the football club PSG, who Messi has just recently joined. So, and of course, Qatar has sponsors Bayern Munich, Roma. They've got issues. They've got links with Real Madrid. They've got, you know, there's so many things that we have to put it into perspective. That it's not just, why is it that Newcastle United is being focused on and not the other clubs? I mean, I can literally go through all the clubs. Chelsea with Roman Abramovich, Everton with who's the billionaire owner who's got shares in Usmanov. What's his name? Alisher Usmanov, right? Both of them have direct links with Putin and some of the human rights issues that are going on in Russia. You could argue the same thing. So the point I'm making is, and even if you want to go further, Liverpool as well, by the way, Roshan, your club, right? Dubai International were at one point going to buy Liverpool in 2005, right? And if we're going to talk about an ethical question of billionaire owners, then why is it one rule for, and this is where I think there is some racism in this whole thing, this conversation as well, by the way, which we can touch upon. Why is it one rule for Arab owners, billionaire owners, and another rule for rich white Americans, hedge funds, you know, immoral dealings from a capitalistic perspective, and the human rights that they're involved in when they take over a club as well, you know, from their perspective? Why is the same outrage not given from one perspective to the other when it comes to owners and clubs? You can even talk about Arsenal. You can even talk about the World Cup, Qatar World Cup. You can talk about Russia 2018 World Cup there being a PR exercise and so on and so forth. In fact, recently, I just read yesterday, David Beckham is going to be the ambassador and the face of the Qatar World Cup. And he's going to get paid £15 million per year to be the ambassador for Qatar football. So the point I'm making is there's a lot of inconsistencies in my view. There's a lot of double standards. There's a lot of selective outrage when it comes to the Premier League, when it comes to the World Cup, when it comes to, you know, other sports. Ayyaz mentioned boxing with Anthony Joshua and the Ruiz fight in Saudi and so on and so forth. It seems a bit. It seems a bit out there, in my opinion. I don't know what you guys think. Steve, Roshan, Ayyaz, jump in any time. But this is just my.
I agree. You made the point about Chelsea. I mean, there's a prime example. We were talking off air, you know, beforehand, and I brought the point up about, you know, the fact that, you know, they're funding, the Russians are funding Israeli settlers on Palestinian land. That isn't being brought up by Crystal Palace fans down at the match yesterday. No, they've got a big banner with Bin Salman on and a huge sword and a magpie at the front and Richard Masters and blood on your hands. And, you know, it's becoming, I mean, that was a racist banner. Kick it out. We're quick to jump on the fact that Newcastle fans were wearing some traditional Saudi dress to welcome the new owners. They weren't doing that because they were being racist. They were doing that because they were celebrating the takeover. Yet, you know, there's one rule for one and one rule for the other. And I think that's the bottom line, is that it's the issue of human rights and sports washing. Although, you know, we've had to read up on this and get to know it, that isn't a debate for football fans. We just want to see Newcastle United Football Club awake from being a sleeping giant and compete at the highest level, which really is what it's all about. We just wanted to have a little bit of hope. And this takeover is been met not by, you know, people who've got diplomas in geopolitical arguments. It's been met by jealous football supporters who wish it was their club that had been taken over. It's as simple as that.
Well, there's a comment here by John Justice Allen, right? Hassan, get this comment on, right? The issues of human rights sports washing aren't for football fans to debate the other fan. The other fans bringing it up are motivated by jealousy, not world peace. Exactly what you just said there. And I believe that to be true. I really do think that is true.
Yeah, it's sad, really, isn't it? I mean, you know, ultimately, from our perspective, you know, it's a football issue. And I've got, you know, the utmost sympathy for anybody who has suffered at the hands of any regime. I mean, let's face it, you know, we are fairly civilized in this country now. But if you look at our history and go back through the English history books, we were quite a barbaric, barbaric country and a barbaric, people back in the day. So it's, everyone has their history. Shouldn't this be a time really where, maybe we give people a chance to change and move on? And, I personally have never been to Saudi Arabia. I have never been to North Korea. I have never been to any of these places that I see on a regular basis on a news which is written, scripted, and put into our homes by people who've got their own personal political agenda. I'm sure if I went to some of those places, I would see something completely different to what I'm showing on television. And I would say that's the same with Saudi as it is with anywhere else.
Can I come in?
Go for it. Yeah, jump in anytime.
Yeah, I think, Steve, if you went to Yemen, for example, I think you change your mind. Because that war on Yemen, which has killed thousands of people and has led to a cholera epidemic where nearly 1 million people's lives are at risk, was ordered by the new owner of Newcastle United.
Actually, I want to challenge that a little bit as well, Roshan.
All right, but can I just finish my piece before you come back in?
Yeah, about the Yemen.
I've got quite a lot to say. I think I don't blame Steve, and I don't blame Newcastle United. Obviously, Newcastle United is the center of Steve's world. That's his priority, the club. And he sees all this money coming in. He sees a bright future. That's his priority. I get that. Newcastle United, same for them. Mike Ashley, whatever. He's taking the money. It's the best for him. But I am a little bit, and don't take this the wrong way, brothers, because we're all brothers and we all love each other. But I'm a little bit disappointed at the comments coming from Ayyaz and Abu Tayyib, because we're Muslims and our priority isn't football. Our priority isn't Newcastle United Football Club or Liverpool or Chelsea or Man United. It's Islam, okay? And it's worshipping God. And this is not, I don't think this is befitting of those kind of comments. I don't think it's befitting of Muslims even to support this takeover when it's clearly sports washing, where there are clearly bigger issues at play here rather than football. Now, I would tell you what you've just done is deflected. The classic deflection.
No, hold on. No,
I'll be brief. I'll be very brief.
Let me reply to that first of all, because you're saying you're disappointed. Islam is the primary objective here, and I mentioned this in my video as well, by the way, when you interviewed me, that I genuinely do believe that this is good, not only for football, the football club. It's good for the city. It's good for the communities, and it's good for Islam. Why is it good for Islam? Because I genuinely believe that this takeover will bring about better conversations, better links and ties, and remove some of the many, many misconceptions and discussions that we have on a regular basis with our non-Muslim counterparts. I genuinely believe that. And I've witnessed that and I've seen it since the takeovers happened. People are more intrigued to find out about what Islam is so they can get a better understanding so that we can have better relations and better, a better way of living together here in Newcastle and probably the rest of the country when people understand Islam better. Bro, we've been on the back of 20 years plus of being the bad guys in both from a political government level all the way through to the mainstream media, and we have been the people who are, the Muslim community I'm talking about have been labeled, and a certain narrative has been pushed about that. And I genuinely think that this type of takeover is good. You've seen what happened in Manchester City with the takeover there. It's been good for Muslims there. You've seen what happened with Liverpool with Mohammed Salah. It's been good for Muslims there. So I don't think that is a fair statement to make. I really don't. I think that the takeover is actually good for Islam and good for Muslims. I genuinely think that. From a
can I just jump in there?
Abu,
what I'm going to say, and it's a perfect time to talk about it because we talked about this midweek. I basically, I mentioned the trolling that I'd received over this takeover from various accounts, and a lot of it was also about the interview that I did with Tommy Robinson on my channel. Now, the reason that I had to do an interview with somebody who is quite clearly, against Islam, he's an Islamophobe, The reason that I did that particular interview was because me personally, my character was being attacked. Now, it was being attacked because there was a photo that had got into the public domain of me with Tommy Robinson. He turned up in a bar where we were watching an England game. And essentially, there was a photograph taken, which was never supposed to see the light of day. I jumped onto this photograph with my mates, the one that is all in the photograph. It's a big regret because doing something like that, it looks as if you're supporting this person. However, a journalist then got a hold of that photograph and was going to write a story to suggest that I was some kind of far-right extremist. Now, anyone who doesn't know me would look at me and think skinhead, Geordie, thug, and somebody who quite clearly probably goes to EDL events and is a big fan of Tommy Robinson. And there's a photograph that proves it. And that's exactly what you're talking about what's happened with Muslims over the last 20 years. Somebody with a beard, somebody with a rucksack on going to a concert or going out for the bus is somebody who's looked at as, oh, well, that's probably a terrorist. And that is the kind of world we live in now. You're judged on the way you look. You're judged maybe on a photograph, which, you know, a photograph can tell 100 different stories. But that takeover that we've just been through, that for the last 2 years is what I've had to deal with on social media, Abu, being called a racist. Now that the takeover's gone through, it seems to have died down from a lot of these faceless anonymous accounts. But I have had that, thrown at me. So what I decided to do earlier this year, I decided to try and track down Tommy Robinson and get him for an interview. So I stuck him on my platform on my Steve Wraith YouTube, and I interviewed him. And it was probably the most severe interview he's ever had to do. He's faced Piers Morgan, he's faced all these other people, but I did a 2-hour interview with him, Abu. And I asked him every single question that everybody wanted to ask. Fair enough, he gave answers which people would imagine he would give. And, you know, he was fairly non-committal on stuff, but he answered everything. But I had to do that to protect my own reputation, Abu, and it's very, very similar. And that was why when you reached out to me this week and said, you know, via Stu Armstrong, would you mind coming on your podcast? I was more than happy to do that because I agree with you. I think this takeover at Newcastle will really put us at the forefront of building relationships in the community amongst people. And I think we are a very multicultural society anyway. I'm proud to come from Newcastle because Newcastle is black and white, and it's black and white strips, but it's black and white in the community. We live together side by side. And I do feel that so many other areas in the United Kingdom could take a leaf out of the Northeast's book and would be a much better place.
I agree. And I think this is what, from what I've seen on the ground so far, I think this is what has been happening. Roshan, you mentioned earlier on that, you know, there are, when you came up, there's severe misgivings about what Islam is. People don't know what Islam and Muslims are all about. And when you were talking to them, they obviously have their stereotypes and they clearly don't know what Islam is. And from the work that we do at the Islamic Diversity Center here is to bring about awareness about what Islam Muslims are. And it's given us a huge opportunity to do that. I genuinely believe that. And it's given us a massive opportunity to change that narrative that people have about Islam and Muslims for the past 20 years. This is another tool, I guess, in which we can do that. And
I think,
yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't dispute what you say in terms of, obviously, this has some benefits for the local community, for Muslims in the local community and non-Muslims. There's no doubt about that. But I think there's a big picture and a small picture. And I think from my perspective, you're seeing the small picture. For me, obviously, as somebody who has been a journalist for 25 years and has reported extensively from the Middle East and seen the destruction that, you know, not just Saudi Arabia, but they are one of the nations that has caused a lot of destruction in that region. To have directly seen that myself, that is the big picture for me. I would oppose anything that would whitewash their reputation. And I think what you did, Abu Tayyib, and also Ayyaz, if I can, you know, say this politely, you were deflecting. Ultimately, you were going on about Anthony Joshua and Saudi Arabia and Man City and PSG, and that's all true, what you said. But two wrongs don't make a right. And I oppose all that stuff as well. If Liverpool got taken over by the UAE tomorrow, I would stop being a Liverpool fan. Because ultimately, I'm a football fan, I'm football nuts, I love it. You know, since I was a little kid, I think about it far too much and keeps me up at night. But ultimately, I do have a sense of priorities. And ultimately, I know it is 22 guys kicking the ball around. And,
I mean,
and the other thing that I would like to say, just to finish on this one.
You mentioned about Yemen, Roshan, yeah? Again, it's very selective, the way that you framed that conversation about the war in Yemen. The war in Yemen didn't start with MBS. The war in Yemen started much before that. The war in Yemen, if we're going to be factual about it, started with the Houthis firing missiles, and then Iran backed, and all the rest of it. And there's
we can have an hour on this, but yeah.
There's a couple of comments from Muslim BB here, which I want to put up there, because I think there's some truth to that. And again, without getting too political on the whole war in Yemen situation, it is a bit more complicated in the way that
I mean, it is a bit more complicated, Abu Tayyib, but at the same time, I think
again, it's the selective outrage, bro. I don't see the same amount of what you call it. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not a supporter of any regime that causes wars like that against in the Muslim world and so on and so forth. And I have no reason to defend anybody. But let's be fair and consistent with the same outrage against Iran as that you have with Saudi Arabia. Then let's be consistent.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm not going to dispute that. I think that ultimately Iran and Saudi Arabia are the two states in the region whose proxy wars are causing destruction for the Ummah. So I can't say any fairer than that. But my final point I want to make, guys, before I let you guys come in, is that look, football is a motor of global capitalism now. It's not just a game. Like when I was growing up in the 80s, it was about pure football. You know, there wasn't that much money in it. So it was literally about the beauty of the game. Everyone used to play it. You know, everyone was obsessed about it. There's only 3 TV channels or whatever, you know, but now it is literally a business and fans are getting ripped off. I'm not a mug, you know, I'm not going to pay a season ticket for any Premier League club. I haven't been to a Premier League, despite being a massive football fan, I've not been to a Premier League game in over 10 years, simply because I refuse to pay those prices. And, you know, the price of the shirts, it's all global capitalism, and the fans are being ripped off left, right, and center. And all clubs are doing it. And this Super League stuff that, you know, happened a few months ago, and everyone's celebrating it didn't happen. Ultimately, the Super League started with the Premier League. That's when football started to get really corrupted, when the Premier League started. And I think what we're moving towards is an elite of 6 clubs run by states and, you know, huge media moguls, billionaires, whatever. And ultimately, everyone else gets left behind. And for me, that is the antithesis of what football should be. It should be about, you know, fair competition, and the money should be spread around, you know, kind of, you know, 90 clubs or more than that, not just 6 fat clubs. And Newcastle United are now celebrating because they're going to be one of the fat cats.
Of course, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the game changed when Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea. The whole landscape changed. We've got to be realistic about that. It is very idealistic what you're saying, but look, this is the way that the game is, and we have to accept that this is the way forward. Everybody's had their time. Let Newcastle United have their time now from the top. Right? But look, let the one who doesn't have a Saudi arms deal cast the first stone. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about Saudi. Let's look at UK first of all. Let's look right at home before we even think about dealing with Saudi and the human rights. Who's selling them the weapons and so on and so forth. But again, that's going to take it to another political stance, right? But look, the point here is, I don't have any. Honestly, I don't have any issues with the Saudi takeover from a Islamic perspective, from a something that's going to help the Muslim community here, from a community perspective. Whether you see me as being small-minded and looking at the small picture, that's fine. That's what I deal with on my day-to-day basis. This is what I do as part of my work, right? On a larger scale, again, I'm going to question the selective outrage on what's going on. But look, there's a couple of comments here I'm going to read out. That one says, as a Saudi, I'm extremely more offended and sad when I saw the banner and the racism we've been through from other football clubs, not Newcastle supporters. Let's have a look. Faisal Al is saying, what are you talking about, Roshan? Who is this guy and what is his qualification? You're getting some heat now, Roshan, yeah? All I see is envy and hatred with every word he said. Ahmed says, are you saying UK and its Rothschild queen who created the Zionist state have anything to do with human rights? Faisal says, I'm kind of laughing at Roshan. He's a white man wannabe. He's repeating what the white journalists say. I'm going to give you a chance to respond, Roshan. Yeah, you're getting a lot of trolling here, right? So,
are they all coming from Riyadh?
No, I don't know where they're coming from. Actually, probably, yeah, I don't know. Liverpool are owned by Americans who are large parts of racism, but there's no banners raising the point. And the recent BLM issues, some of these fans attacking the takeover, booing the players. Shama Saeed says 100% agree. It'll be more awareness of Islam. Yeah, there's a few. I'll let you respond to them while I check the other comments out, Roshan.
I mean, what do I respond to? It's just abuse. I mean, I can't respond to abuse. It's just like silence is the best response, isn't it?
Yeah.
If there's a substantive point you'd like me to respond to, then I'm more than happy to. But
okay, how about this one?
Didn't seem like there was any points there.
Yeah, okay. How about this one then, yeah? Newcastle fans will welcome people from diverse backgrounds and will become stronger from it. I understand that there are a lot of deeper issues here than football, but it is not a start to improve.
Yeah, as I said to you, I just think there obviously are lots of local benefits for Newcastle as a city, for fans of the club, and even for Muslims, maybe, in Newcastle. And I think that it might be a little bit of a boost to community relations. I don't dispute any of that, but the world's not black and white, brother. You know, there's a big picture and a small picture. And I think what I'm seeing is the big global picture. You guys are seeing the local picture, which I understand. But, you know, we'll have to agree to disagree on that.
Two sides of the story, though. But there could be two sides of the story, right? Because I see this with other political issues. We see one side of the story, and then an agenda gets created. And then some people will say Islam is X, Y, and Z. But then when they go to, Muslim countries, see the Muslims are like, oh, but they're actually kind, caring, considerate people who are good to their neighbors. And, you know, they have similarities to other religions. And that's where, obviously, the media shows one agenda. But obviously, what I understood the title for this particular show was for the football element. Yeah, there is obviously some grey areas, but if we want to talk about Islamic, then we should hear from him himself, Mohammed bin Salman, because I honestly think if we're going to take it down that way, it's every Muslim's honour, not just for the fact that it's him. He doesn't have a right to defend himself because a lot of accusations have been made against him. Some maybe are true. And obviously about Jamal Khashoggi, of course, it's very sad, unfortunate that for an innocent person to die. This is what's widely been believed, but if there's been like a democratic trial and what have you, then we can say, yep, he was 100% behind the killing of Jamal Khashoggi.
No one's going to put MBS on trial. Come on.
Yeah, but the bottom line,
I'm just saying, if you want to take
viewpoint is, look, we're a people of evidence and we're a people of justice. We have to be.
This is my point, brother. Yeah.
Across the board. Now, look, you mentioned a couple of things about MBS, and I think I think that there is a lot more of a bias just because it is MBS as opposed to Sheikh Mansour and others. And the reason why I think that is because maybe people have their personal biases against Saudi or MBS and so on and so forth. I don't. I personally don't. I'm neutral on the whole thing. But look, you talked about the PIF. MBS is effectively taken over Newcastle and so on and so forth. But look, the PIF what is the PIF? It's a public investment fund. It is a sovereign wealth fund, right? And the whole point, from what I understand, from the little I understand of this, is that Saudi Arabia makes most of its money from fossil fuels, from energy. And just like Dubai and other oil-rich countries, they want to spread the risk of their investments and, diversify their portfolio so they're not fully reliant upon fossil fuels. And that's a smart move for any nation state to do. That's a smart move for any government to do, not to be just focused on one and investing in other things. This is a business investment. Let's put this in perspective. Okay,
this was all down essentially when the nuts and bolts were taken away. This was down to one thing. It was down to piracy. It was down to piracy of football, and this was as we've said was about football, tonight's program, and it's as simple as that. Once the piracy issue was sorted out, the takeover went through, no problem at all. This wasn't about anything to do with what may not have happened between Saudi Arabia, bin Salman, and anybody else. And because we do deals with the Saudis, it should never have been an issue in the first place. I think that was what Newcastle fans were always saying. It did turn out that it was, probably the actual TV deal, which is stood in the way, and that's it. It's done now. And I think what people should be looking at is trying to build on the positivities of this takeover. And I agree with Roshan in a lot of ways. We are looking at it from a local point of view, but who's to say that from small acorns, big oak trees can't grow? And if we're going to have to go down that avenue of, can this be good for the community? Can this be good for the UK worldwide? Possibly it could be. Not everything has to start in the south. Some things could start in the north and then pass on. We need all to learn to live together. Like I said before, there needs to be this harmony amongst the community. We all have to live together. The population is growing year by year. And for me, this takeover is massive, not just for the football club, but for the Northeast and hopefully the UK moving forward. And that's what we've got to hope and pray for. No matter who you pray to, that's what is going to happen, and that we can all start to live together. And I'm not stupid. I know that in an ideal world, that's never going to happen, because in every community, any religion, no matter what race, color, or creed you are, there is good and bad in every community. But ultimately, something like this takeover can be a massive positive, and that's what I wholly believe in.
And just to point on that, if anyone has a problem with PIF taking over as the majority shareholder of Newcastle United, then you have to have a problem with every investment that they've made. Facebook, for example, I'm sure you all still use Facebook. They have investments in Facebook, in Disney, in BP, in what's the other one? Uber. If you use an Uber, then that means you have selective outrage as far as I'm concerned. Because if you have a problem with Mohammed bin Salman being the head of PIF and he's bought Newcastle United, then you should equally have a problem with all of the other things that they've invested in. And I don't see that. And that's where I see a lot of double standards, if I'm being pretty honest about it. This is where I see. And sports washing, look, let's be honest, if we're going to talk about sports washing, then we have to talk about, it's across the board for every sport. Boxing,
I was going to say about the
wrestling, UFC in Dubai, Grand Prix. You've got to talk about all of it then. And if we're going to talk about human rights, which human rights are we talking about exactly, right? There are so many human rights issues. You can't focus on one aspect and ignore the others and keep it just focused on one country and not other countries as well. The fact of the matter is we live in a very complex world, global world. And that means that we have to be as Muslims, we have to be very fair and just in the way that we deal with rulers, leaders, governments, individuals, organizations. And, when you talk about Ummah's money, Roshan, again, I think we had that conversation off air. I'm going to say you have to quantify that. How is that Ummah's money? If you consider him to be the Khalifa, then okay, then you have a point. But if you're talking about nation states, I don't think you really have a point there. He has a responsibility for the wealth that Allah has given him for his people, just like the same way that Imran Khan for Pakistan has a responsibility for his people, and the same way that Erdogan has for his Turkish people. If we're talking about nation states, and if you consider him the legitimate ruler and government for his country, his nation state, then he has the right to spend that money in whichever way he sees fit for his people, doesn't he?
Are you want to come back in?
How do you as a Muslim living in the UK lay claim to that being Ummah's money is something that is responsible for you?
Well, I think that ultimately we do live now in an era of nation states. Obviously, those nation states in the Middle East, came about in a very unfortunate way and a very unjust way after the end of World War II. But let's not have a history lesson. But I think this ultimately is the home of Islam, right? MBS will become king one day. He will be Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, the custodian of the two holy mosques.
Yeah.
What kind of example is he giving? By literally living like a billionaire with his yachts and the whole Saudi clan, literally, there's a perception, because I've, like yourself, Abu Tayyib, I've traveled to probably at least 25 Muslim countries around the world. There is a perception that is the Ummah's money, and it should be spread more equitably around the Ummah rather than being the plaything for these degenerate rich Saudis.
If that was for like a charitable cause, then wouldn't you argue that's more the Ummah's money? Because essentially, I understand it that Mohammed bin Salman's a businessman. He sells oil, and he's very good at it because he's stinking rich. He's 400 billion worth, whatever it is. So I put that counter argument in there.
He's the king of his country, right? He can spend like any other sovereign can spend the money whichever way they see fit for.
But brothers, one thing I would say is, obviously being the editor of a Muslim news website, we take the temperature of especially British Muslims, but we have a lot of readers and viewers abroad as well. And I can tell you, brother, Saudi Arabia is very unpopular. It's extremely unpopular. I would say Iran and Saudi Arabia probably
No, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Look, if they've got PR issues that they need to deal with, that's for them to deal with, right? If they are unpopular for whatever reason they're unpopular for, again, that's fine. You can still disagree with what they're doing and where they're spending their money, but you can't lay claim to being Ummah's wealth. That's my point. Unless you consider him the Khalifa, then it's a different story. But I don't think the people who are complaining do consider him the Khalifa. So I think from a Sharqi point of view, I think there's a lot of misgivings, and there needs to be a lot more understanding on what it means to be the Ummah's wealth and who's responsible for that. Because you could even argue that the latter Ottoman sultans wasted Ummah's money in that.
I'm sure they did. Yes.
The point I'm making is, though, we have.
Do you think, Abu Tayyib, do you think that's a fantastic example of leadership for Muslims? Spending money like that on the world's tallest buildings, the football clubs?
I think the leadership
of
generally around the globe is very weak. I do think that. I do consider that. And I don't think that they're certainly not like the early generations of Muslim leadership, like the Khulafa Rashideen, and those who we aspire to be like. And they are our role models who we should be like. But that's not the question at hand here. The question at hand here is, from a Shari'i point of view, is what they're doing right or wrong? Or is it something that is permissible for them to do, right? And
I just think that Saudi Arabia.
I don't think there's a very strong argument to say that somebody living in the UK, or just by the fact that he's Muslim or she's Muslim, has a right to claim somebody else's wealth because they're in a different nation state. I really don't think that is a correct opinion.
I just think that Saudi Arabia positions itself as the leader of the Muslim world. By dint of the fact that it is home to the two holiest sites in Islam. And I think that ultimately they are not fit to lead the Muslim world. And I think that is a sentiment that is shared amongst the vast majority of the
whole Muslim world. I don't think they claim that at all. I think that they are very clear that they are for their particular nation state, just like every other Muslim leader does. But okay, anyway, that's another conversation. But
what I think would be really beneficial is for somebody like Roshan to come up and do a talk with Newcastle supporters, because ultimately I think education is the key. I think ultimately Newcastle fans would be open to that as well. And I think if there was something organised by the Newcastle United Supporters Trust or other groups, for an open debate, and something you could even sort out, Abu. I don't know. It's something we could talk about off air, but I just think it's very interesting to listen to the debate. Some of it, which means very little to a Newcastle fan, I think would be something that would be beneficial. And I think you would find there would be probably a lot of people who would be very interested in coming to something like that and having Roshan come up to Newcastle and maybe just speak to people and have a chat.
Well, I'll tell you what I would be interested in, Steve, and this is a principle that I'm going to, just to finish off with, I guess, from my point of view, is as Muslims, you know, Roshan brought up the issue about this is an Islam issue, a Muslim issue. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. As Muslims, this is the principle that I follow, that the Prophet ﷺ highlighted. And he said, in an authentic narration, he said, "Ihris ala ma yanfa'u," which means focus on what benefits you. And what I think benefits us in this whole conversation and this whole takeover, from a Muslim's perspective, from an Islamic perspective, what I believe is focus on what benefits you in the sense of, look, the takeover has happened. That's a done deal. It is what it is. How do we use that in a positive way that benefits us as communities? And the way that I see that is about more Islamic awareness. I think that's something that is definitely required for the football fans, for the club, for the communities. The work that we do here at Islamic Diversity Centre is to break down those barriers by showing what Islam really is all about, as opposed to what people hear and see on the mainstream media. And people like Tommy Robinson push, you mentioned him earlier on, some of the misinformation and inaccuracies that he pushes. For us to go through that for the past 20 years, it's our job as Islamic Diversity Centre to undo some of that narrative and change some of those perspectives that people have and show the true nature of Islam and Muslims rather than what they hear and see of the mainstream media from a minority. And I think there's optimism for the future. I really do. I think there's benefit for the club, the city, the people, the Muslim community in particular. I think there's a lot of positives to take from this. And that's the principle that I hold with regards to this whole situation when the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, focus on what benefits you. And this is where the angle that I come from this whole discussion and debate. I really do. You're more than welcome to come back on me on that, Roshan, yeah?
No. I mean, look, we've had it's interesting when people disagree. You know, too often I go on podcasts and everyone says the same thing. So I'm quite happy to disagree politely with you. It's been a pleasure disagreeing with you.
Okay, good. Ayyaz, jump in, bro. Any comments that you'd like to make with regards to that?
I was just saying the fact that what Steve was saying, obviously, education is the need here, because there's one argument, there's a counter argument, and yeah, sit-down discussion will be helpful, because one thing that I've noticed with the Newcastle takeover, for example, a lot of people wearing traditional Arabic attire, thinking that it's very Saudi inspired kind of thing. So I think, you know, by them simply wearing a garment, it might engage them to learn a bit more about the culture and maybe try and clear up some misconceptions if there are any, you know. So that's my general opinion. I think there is definitely good, because what we do as humans is natural. We see what's in front of us and we judge what's there. We don't usually have hindsight, because we always say hindsight's a beautiful thing. I think this is why.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You mentioned you mentioned that, because obviously the club did a U-turn this week. I mean, if you go to NUFC.com, they use the headline "Don't throw in the towel," and essentially because the club had said that it could have been deemed offensive, and they were asking people not to wear Saudi headdress. Now they've done a U-turn, and they said that they want to be more inclusive, basically saying that in fact, I can quote it. It said the fans who've celebrated by wearing culturally traditional clothing, including head coverings, have been part of that welcome. Those who wish to support the club by wearing appropriate culturally inspired clothing should feel free to do so as they see fit. We are inclusive to all. That's about learning lessons. Newcastle fans weren't doing it, as I said at the top of the programme, weren't doing it to be offensive. And now the club have looked at it. They've made a statement. Now they've reissued a statement, and now it's, they're welcoming. And there's even talk of commercialising that and potentially doing a black and white headdress as opposed to red and white, which of course is our rival Sunderland. But it just shows that if you talk about things, it could be massively beneficial. You're a Man United fan, you're a Liverpool fan, we're Newcastle fans, but ultimately, the No Room for Racism campaign is still continuing to flourish, and the record is getting out there time and time again. People are still taking the knee, in every game, and it's been accepted. And
even in the cricket this evening, Steve.
Yeah, which Pakistan won, I believe. Which, congratulations,
Yeah.
Pakistan. But ultimately, the thing about Newcastle, and this is what people have to remember, is that when I first started going to the games in 1984, Newcastle Stadium was a shell of what it is now. There was no roofs on the standing ends. Everybody used to get wet. But the worst thing about those games, I used to queue up to go in the Gallagher. There used to be skinheads like me standing outside the ground selling National Front magazines. We've come a long way since that. Footballers used to go on the pitch and they used to have bananas thrown at them, and the monkey chants were prevalent amongst most of the support. And ultimately, we've learned, we've changed, we've moved on, and that is a massive positive as far as Newcastle United football fans and clubs concerned. And that's changed up and down the country. Now we're in a position where we can take that next step because of the Saudi takeover. And I do think it's positive. And as I say, Roshan, it's been great to have you on this podcast because I've learned so much just from listening to you. And I think a lot of people will. And it's all about a healthy debate. And that's what Abu said to me. This will be a healthy debate. It might get heated, but that's what it's all about. Talking, communication, and listen. But also the most important thing in life is to listen. And if you listen, you'll not go far wrong.
I think one thing can I just say one thing? It's that on the clothing. I mean, you and me were up there, weren't we, Abu Tayyib? And we saw lots of fans with the Saudi headdress and the thobes, and it wasn't an issue at all. It was all in good fun. And I don't know why the club got involved in that statement, which was ridiculous, really. I know they've done a U-turn, but one thing that was a little bit problematic, I think, was when they had the Saudi flag with the Shahada on it, the declaration of faith. There's only one God and Muhammad and his messenger. And some fans were drinking alcohol and holding the flag at the same time. Now I know they weren't doing that because they were doing it out of ignorance. They didn't mean to offend, but that would be something that Muslims would find offensive. So I think the club should have picked up on that rather than the headdress and the thobe. And the other thing I would say is that, as I say, whenever I go up north, whenever I go past Birmingham, probably, people get friendlier. They're more open to a discussion. They listen. They're less closed-minded. And I think Newcastle, obviously we're three Muslims here, Steve. I don't want to be preaching at you, but I think Newcastle might be a ripe area for quite a lot of conversions, to be honest. Because even when people were coming up to your stall, Abu Tayyib, they obviously were like in listening mode, and they love having a conversation, and it's not a one-way conversation as well. So, I know I've said a lot of kind of negative things tonight, but, like in my report right at the end, I said there could be a silver lining to this cloud, and I do believe that.
Yeah, I think with regards to the clothing, I believe in one of the chaps that we spoke to had the headdress on, and he said something along the lines of, "I'm wearing this because they've taken over our club, and it's a way of me showing respect in return that we've been saved from Mike Ashley, basically, that these guys are coming and taking over it." I don't think any of it was malicious. I really don't. One thing I would say though is there is something around. It does cut it a bit close to the bone because of the historical and the racial slurs that have been around for some time when we discuss from the racist element, which is racial slurs like raghead and towelhead and things like that, which have been used historically to racially abuse people from an Arab background. So I think there is that. I think that's why Kick It Out brought the issue up in the first place. But from the conversations that we had, there was nothing malicious, certainly nothing with any malicious intent on why they were generally happy and showing appreciation why they were wearing what they were wearing. With regards to the flag, I agree with you. This is where I think we as an organization have got a lot more work to do to remove some of that ignorance and show people what Islam really is all about and show how people should respect the flag because it has the Arabic writing on there, which is the Declaration of Faith. And I think that's where this is where we have to come in and do our work and where the positives can come from this, because it opens up a conversation. People are waving the flag, but not knowing what it says on there. So it's our job just to tell them what it actually says on the flag and how they should respect that. But like I agree with you. I think it's done out of ignorance, not out of any form of malicious intent, for sure.
Yeah, I think as well with Dad, Amanda Staveley's husband. We've got to remember he's Iranian. So there's another link in this chain of the takeover. You know, there's so many positive things about this. I said this before the takeover took place. If they came through, I mean, they're not going to sort world peace out, but it's just an amazing group of people who have taken over our football club, and ones which can encourage diversity and so many other positive things to come from it. And you know, I think ultimately that, you know, the football club is what we want to see progress. But I think community wise, I think it'll do wonders, and I think things will certainly be on the up, both on and off the pitch at St James's Park.
I think so. There's a couple of comments I'm going to quickly read out before we wrap up the show, guys. Yeah. ADB0471 says, totally agree. Double standards. The bottom line is Newcastle have upset the dodgy cartel. We have upset the apple cart. Well, Didham's karma is greedy, yeah? You're not... hold on, what's the other one? Yeah, this is an interesting one. Retro Andy said, I don't know if we can call it sports washing, since the abhorrent human rights issues are front and center, more so after the takeover. I just hope the Saudi state are listening and will change for the better. You know, I hope that too as well, actually. Yeah, I do have some optimism that it's this thing that people call sports washing is actually a way for them to hold themselves to account and change for the better. I really hope that is the case. Let's have a look. The love of football unites human beings globally. That's the way it should stay. Politics, religion are separate issues. I think there's some overlap, though. I don't think we can completely separate them all together. I think there is some overlap on there. A lot of people saying it's not Umma's money. Some people are saying Saudi's unpopular because of people like you. Britain is killing more than the US, blah, blah, blah. Got quite a few different comments here. Yeah, I think... Yeah, here's an interesting one. As a Muslim, it's perfectly within our right to criticize the Saudi rulers who are custodians of the two holy mosques. I think we have the right to criticize any Muslim ruler who's not following Islam properly, not just the custodian of the two holy mosques. Barry says, I've learned so much from this podcast alone about alternative views on a number of issues. Yeah, it's been busy, guys. The comments have been very, very busy. And a lot of people cussing me out as well. Okay, that's all right. You can cuss.
It's an open debate, Abu, and that's what's good about this. That's what is good about this.
I'm thick-skinned. We're, as you know, Steve, Geordie's, we're thick-skinned. We're not really that fussed about people cussing us out and stuff, right? Yeah, but basically, it's been an interesting conversation, guys. I think there's so much more we could unpack, but we've gone over the time limit that we were supposed to have. So I'm going to give you all a chance to give one last sort of comment before we wrap it up. I'll start with you, Roshan. Then we'll go to Ayyaz, then Steve to have the final comment. Yeah. So, Roshan, over to you.
I'll be really brief. I've got nothing more to say about that, really, apart from the fact that obviously I think there's a big picture and a small picture. I focus on the big picture. You guys, for your own reasons, are focusing on the small picture. I get that. I understand it. And I hope some benefit comes out of this, inshallah.
Okay, inshallah. Ayyaz, over to you, bro.
Yeah, so kind of in a reply to what brother is saying, we will look at the quote small picture because we are football fans. So that's the point that we're going to look at. Like I said, we're not politicians. Of course, any humanitarian injustices are, well, as Muslims, we make dua that the situation changes and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the judge of all in terms of that aspect. But the football aspect, I think there is a lot of good to happen and something, what we were saying, me and Steve were in kind of agreement of, is to sit down, have dialogue, and both sets of people can be educated.
Excellent. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, I agree with everything really that you've said tonight, Abu. I think as well. I think it's been a very interesting debate. I think Ayyaz and me both agree as well. With regards to the fact that this is more of a football debate and a football argument for us. But I also agree with what Roshan says as well. And in a lot of ways, I think it's just been it's been educational for me as a football fan to listen to the different sides of the argument. But for me, I'll reiterate what I've said throughout the whole podcast, and that is essentially that this is a great success for Newcastle as a football club, and hopefully a great success for the area. I think it's very early days. I think we could probably come on in a year's time and do another podcast and say, well, where are we at now? It's a year since this happened, and it would be interesting to see what has changed and whether there has been anything positive come from it. But I believe there will be. I believed 4 years ago that these were the right people to take over our football club, and nothing that has happened since the takeover has changed my mind. I think that they will do, they will do exactly what they said they were going to do and more. And I think that all eyes will be on the Northeast for the right reasons and not the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and final words from me, I guess, is going to be, I don't think we're focusing just on the small issue. I think we are focusing on all of the issues. Of course, nobody is going to justify anybody's human rights issues, Muslim or otherwise. I don't think anyone is trying to do that. But I am optimistic generally. I think that there is a lot of good that's going to come from this, not only for football, for the city, for the club, for the communities, for the ummah. I think that there's a lot of benefit that's going to come from this, inshallah. So on that note, I think let's wrap it up there. It's been a good discussion, good back and forth. I really do think that there is room for these debates and discussions. I really do think that there is a lot of opportunities to correct some of the inaccuracies and insecurities as well, I would say. But I really do think that a lot of it's down to jealousy as well and selective outrage. I'm still going to hold my viewpoint on that. And I like this last comment here. We football fans can't solve world problems. We fans first of all, period. Yeah, I think that is true as well. So I think that there is, although there's overlap, I really don't think that it's going to make major changes to the current global affairs. I really, I am optimistic. I hope things do change for the better. But essentially, it's a football club. That's the bottom line of it all, right? And we should put things in context. And on that note, I'd like to thank my guests, Roshan, Ayyaz, Steve. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be back again for the next Muslim Geordie podcast. I don't even know what the topic's going to be yet, but it depends on who our guests are, and we'll keep you posted. All right. So on that note, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank you very much, everyone.